so glad that you're here to take part in that, to take part in this today. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Very often in situations, community meetings and conversations, you are asked to shut off your phones or put away your phones. We are not going to ask you to do that today. Rather, we're going to ask you to silence your phone and then get ready to be part of the social media experience that always accompanies our ELCTalks. We are going to be live streaming our talk today on our Twitter feed, and that's at ELCMDM. And as so many of you have probably heard, if you are not following the ELC on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, what is you doing? So go ahead and hook that up right now so that you can be a part of the experience. So let's begin with introductions of our panelists today. Dr. Luther G. Brewster is Chief of Policy and College of Medicine Community Development for Florida International University School of Medicine. Dr. Brewster's background is, Dr. Brewster's background is community development, and he has worked both in the public and the private sectors. Since beginning his career in 2003, Dr. Brewster has held academic and research positions at the City University of New York and the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, Michigan. He served as consultant for the expansion of the 125th Street Business Improvement District in Harlem, New York, and the Arsenal FC Emirates Stadium Housing Regeneration Project in London, England. The focus of Dr. Brewster's work is on the identification and correction of health risks created by projects, programs, and policies that typically are not viewed as having a relationship to health. And he has a consistent track record of implementing grassroots strategies to address community concerns. And so we're very pleased to have Dr. Brewster here with us today. And moving on to Dr. Marvin Dunn, who taught in the Department of Psychology at Florida International University for 34 years. He retired there as chairman of the department in 2006. He earned his PhD in psychology from the University of Texas at Knoxville. And he's co-authored The Miami Riot of 1980, Crossing the Bounds with Bruce Porter, and authored Black Miami in the 20th Century, 1997, as well as The Beast in Florida, A History of Anti-Black Violence, 2012, and A History of Florida Through Black Eyes, 2016. He has directed 3 documentary films, Black Seminoles in the Bahamas, The Red Bay's Story, Murder on the Solani River, and the Willie James Howard story in Rosewood Uncovered. And I do want to remind you that Dr. Dunn has a book table set up and is happy to sign any books that you may purchase here today. And then there is Anisha Randolph, who is an entrepreneur and founder of Sweet Butter Group. Ms. Randolph is Legacy Magazine's Trailblazer of the Year for 2016. And one of the 50 most powerful and influential people in Miami, Miami Herald 2016, Miami's top 40 under 40 honoree of 2015, and the City of Miami Gardens 2016 Black History honoree in business excellence. She's dedicated her life to serving and motivating others, which is what leads her and which is what led her at the age of 19 to become the founder of the not-profit mentoring organization for teen girls, Young Ladies of Integrity. In addition to being the first female president of the Young Professionals Network of Miami, YPN Miami, she is the owner of Sweet Butter Group, a hospitality firm that owns and manages brands and experiences such as JK Catering and others. Now, there's much more to be said about all of our panelists here today, and I hope you'll take some time. There's so many tables we have a takeaway for you, so that you can read about them at your leisure and at length. And last but not least, the Hungry Black Man, also known as Starrick Smith. Starrick is the co-founder of Black Tech Week. He is an entrepreneur and a nationally known food blogger. So we're going to ask him very quickly to give us some of your platforms so that we can be tuning in during the course of this event. The Hungry Black Man is an accomplished and experienced public administrator, fundraiser, foodie, and culinary business developer who has committed himself to maximizing the Black experience in the United States. He currently serves as Vice President of Strategy and Development for Black Tech Week with over 12 years of experience in managing public-private partnerships, large-scale events, and nonprofits. So please join me in welcoming all of our panelists here today. As our brother Langston so eloquently wrote in his poem, One-Way Ticket, I pick up my life and I take it with me, and I put it down in Chicago, Detroit, Buffalo, Scranton, any place that is north and east, and not Dixie. So my opening question for the audience here today, as well as for the panelists, who here today is a daughter or son of the Great Migration? Please raise your hands. And would anybody like to mention their family's trajectory? I'll begin by saying that my mother's people started off in Virginia, then moved to Philadelphia, and then my mother's father was not happy with life in Philadelphia and went even further north to Boston, Massachusetts, where the bulk of my family remains today. And so let's begin to my far right with the Hungry Black Man.
So I'm the Hungry Black Man. My name is Sarge Smith. I got excited about food at a very early age and started to just experiment with different flavor profiles and the interest in culture and where food came from and food pathways and how those food pathways affects the economy that we sustain today became my primary interest, and that's how I took my career in another direction, and now I'm here talking about how food interacts with the historical context of the Great Migration. So I want to thank you guys for coming, and I look forward to an insightful conversation.
And Dr. Dunn.
Well, good afternoon. Let me make sure I push the right button.
Technology, something else. I lived the Great Migration. There are not that many of us in this room who can say that, but I see a few faces who can say it. I was born in Florida, Central Florida, rural Florida, Volusia County, in 1940. I went to the back door of white people's homes. I sat in the back of the bus. I was really grown before I went to my first restaurant. When I was 9 years old, 1949, my parents migrated from Central Florida at that time to Long Island, New York, to pick potatoes. We would return to Miami in October, coming back in October. And we did that 3 times so that we could migrate from rural Florida to this city, to Miami. And part of the migration process was blacks leaving the country, moving to cities like Atlanta, Miami, and other places. And our family followed that trajectory. So whether you were going to Detroit from the Black Belt to Mississippi to stay, or whether you were going on the migrant trail to come back and forth, you met the same conditions on the road. I just want to take a moment to talk about that. You had to go to the bathroom in the woods. That was the most insulting part of it. There were white restrooms, we couldn't dare stop at one. It was okay for my brothers and me, 4 of us, 5 of us all together, to hop out of the car and go in the woods. But my mother had to do that. There's also the problem of eating. You could eat along the way at white restaurants, but you had to go to a window in the back. They pass your food out through a window in the back. My father wouldn't do that. He and my mother make us food for the whole 2-day trip from Volusia County to Long Island. There was no stopping at a restaurant. There was also the fear. My father was a very large man. I never saw him fighting. But driving through Georgia, South Carolina. My dad was scared. I can tell it. He gassed up in North Florida and then tried not to stop until we got out of Georgia. We stepped in the car. If the Green Book existed, my dad didn't know about it. That's all the movie. That was us. And that was also the problem with the police. You wonder how it gets installed in some black kids' minds that the police are to be feared. We were afraid of those cops on the road. My father was afraid of that, for good reason. We were boys hearing my dad relate how dangerous white police officers were. I could go on, but I just want to say this. I thought that it was important to tell this part of my story in this book I wrote, A History Forward Through Black Eyes. The last chapter of that book is my own personal story, including what we had to deal with as part of the violence training. So I urge the book. This is a good subject, a good reason for us to get together today. And before I close my comments, I just want to ask one question. Who the hell picked those collard greens? I know collard greens. I grow collard greens. Incredible. That's funny. That's what I expected. Good job. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. We're going to talk a little bit more about the Green Book as today progresses, and we also kissed the cook to Ms. Juanita earlier. Moving on to Ms. Anisha.
Yes, and Juanita is my grandmother. I am Anisha Randolph, and as she mentioned, I am the co-founder of Sweetwater Hospitality Group, and I come from a family lineage of cooks and people who just love food, and my grandmother always raised us to be very proud. Be proud of our heritage, our culture, our foods, our language, the way that we speak. So Ebonics was allowed in my family because we realized that that was a means of survival, of culture, of something that we had to create because where we came from, everything was taken from us. We weren't allowed to, bring our language with us when we were stolen and brought over to the United States. And along with my grandmother and my grandfather, is from the Carolinas, the Gullah Geechee Nation. And I just grew up with such a variety of soul food and growing up in Miami, I was born and raised here. Everyone thought that soul food was just limited to fried chicken, mac and cheese, and collard greens. And because of my family background and my family history, I knew that just wasn't true. So started a catering company with my grandmother several years ago. And when I decided to launch Sweetwater Hospitality Group, the first thing I did was hit the road. My husband and I, we hit the road and we went to several different parts of the South and just really studied soul food and how the barbecue in Tennessee was totally different from the barbecue in Texas and also in Carolina, and how the gumbo and that whole Gullah Geechee style of cooking in the Carolinas was different from the Cajun style cuisine in New Orleans. So I decided to launch Sweetwater Hospitality Group so that we can begin to bring some of that variety here to South Florida. Because, it's such a vast variety of foods that we just aren't exposed to here. But my grandfather is from the Carolinas, my grandmother is from Georgia, and while some of their family migrated north, they decided to migrate south. And along with my grandfather on my grandmother's side, we just have a history of uncivil disobedience. My grandfather, when he left the the Carolinas, he would tell us growing up that he was a slave. And we're like, Grandpa, come on, you weren't a slave. And slavery wasn't, that popular when you were growing up. And, while his parents were, what he meant was that he was a sharecropper. And he said, Misha, if you worked all year long in sweltering heat, and the weather conditions were horrible, and you didn't get paid until the end of the year. I can recall my mom asking for medicine when I got sick. My brother needed shoes throughout the year because we didn't have many clothes and shoes. So the master, he would still call the master would give my mom the medicine and the shoes. It was like a pay advance. We didn't get anything that we didn't need. Everything was needed to live. For 12 whole months you had to live. And in the end of the year, we're looking forward to the fruit of our labor. And they turned to me and they turned to his mom rather, and told her, remember those shoes that we got for little Johnny? And remember that medicine? And he just went down the line with everything that they had given throughout the year. So in fact, you owe me. So the first half of next year, we'll just count that towards, your debt. And then we'll begin next year and start all over again. And hopefully you won't need anything else. I said, Misha, that was slavery. So one night, he decided to go to the master's house, and he lit the entire field on fire. And he fled to Miami. And that's how he ended up here. So growing up with, the knowledge of how even after my great-grandparents came out of slavery, how my grandfather, that's one generation removed from myself, how my grandfather still felt the negative effects of what was considered freedom. It just made me grow up with a totally different appreciation for how far we've come and how much work we have to do to continue to overcome. So my love for food definitely came from my grandfather. We grew up with, the pig picking, as they call it. Some people call it a hog roast. I know the Cubans, they may call it, roasting a hog. They do it on Christmas Eve. Well, every New Year's Eve, we would have pig pickings, and we still do it today. So that's just a little bit about my history and how we migrated further south to Miami. And I'm just grateful to be here.
So once again, my name is Lou Brewster. I do many things at the university, but one of the tasks that I'm charged with is leading a initiative to do home visits throughout Miami-Dade County with medically underserved households, uninsured, undocumented households. We work with somewhere in the neighborhood of about 1,600 households, about 6,000 patients at any given time, providing not just medical services, but getting them connected to all manner of social services. And we use that format to educate our medical students. We, I think, still are the only medical school in the country that requires all of its medical students to perform home visits for 4 years as a mandatory component of their medical education. And I bring that up for a number of reasons. I think one of the things when you start talking about soul food or survival food or flavor food or whatever, there's so many other terms that are used to describe it. You come to realize when you're doing work with households that every culture has their form of soul food or survival food. And then you begin to think about, you start to see the similarities and why there's such a reliance on it. And I was in China and I saw in McDonald's in China they have the workers' meal. And the workers' meal is like 2 or 3 times the calories of the traditional meal. You go to Native American communities and they have, very fatty breads, and this is built into the culture of the. And so 2 main things, right, are usually included. It's fat and salt, right? You want to know what soul food is. in any culture, it's fat and salt, right? Because fat tastes good no matter how you prepare it, right? Cold fat is ice cream, and hot fat is what we just had with macaroni and cheese, and so fat tastes good, okay? And so you add that overwhelming fat component to the fact that there's so many other things that reinforce the behavior of wanting to eat delicious food, right? And so many times my colleagues and others will sometimes demonize soul food because they look at it in a vacuum. They see it as just, oh, food is the component that's leading to these disparities in hypertension and diabetes. But they don't think about the fact that all dysfunction, I don't care what form it takes, has systems that reinforce that dysfunction over time, right? And so I'll give you one example and I'll kind of wrap, but when I was doing my work in Harlem, there was a huge celebration because there was going to be a Kentucky Fried Chicken put on the business district. And I remember, 20-something years old and I'm all in my virtue, fast food in the black community, oh my goodness, on the Harlem, right? And so I had a older gentleman come and pull me to the side and say, hey, Kentucky Fried Chicken, Pepsi, jobs, right? And so that brought a whole new framework to it. He saw it as jobs, I saw it as food, and probably another person saw it as something completely different. Soul food has a very similar component. We see somebody from the outside sees it as food. You go to a church, it's fellowship. You go to a home, it's family teaching. You go to, certain schools, it's mathematics. You go to the local business person, it's local economy. I don't know a lot of soul foods where you don't buy the ingredients local to your neighborhood. I don't care what ethnic group you are. And so we always talk about the economy being close to where you live. Soul food in some ways propagates that. So when you tell people to change that part of their life, or alter that part of their life, it's not happening in a vacuum. You're asking them to change an entire system that is supporting that way of life.
Thank you, Dr. Brewster. This is so often the case, and as I caution the panelists here today, we do have prepared questions, but I'm getting a sense that several of our other panelists would like to weigh in and respond and make some additions to Dr. Brewster's opening. And I'm going to come to Starlets.
Okay, there we go. I wanted to be brief in my opening because I know that a lot of folks need to be educated about soul food and the history of it and how it relates to the Great Migration and why we're here. So my time is up. 4 points I want to make. The first point is something that was a natural observation. When I came in here, I went to the line of the food and I sat down with the greens and the cornbread only because I am a consumer of African American cuisine. It's a big difference between in terms of soul food and African American cuisine. That's number one. Number two, I just linked up with Dr. Dunn and he ate that same exact thing. And he's shy of 2 years of 80 and he looks 60. And so I wanted to point out how the demonization of African people and melanated people's food, I don't know what's wrong with this mic, that demonization has a huge impact on the way that we view Black people, okay? So the fact that we, I don't know what's wrong with that. Okay, there we go. The fact that's still doing that. That's still doing that. Huh?
You sound fine. We can hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
you're aware.
Okay, so the first point was African food, African American cuisine rather, is the first fusion cuisine of the nation, okay? It's a combination of West African cooking traditions and West African products, European influence, and Native American convenience, right? It is not food out of necessity. It is not food that was master scraps. All of these urban legends and lies have to stop. Our food was determined by the slave ship captains who allowed slaves to take their crops on the boats with them because they knew that they did not want to pay for them to eat. Slaves literally farmed and raised their own food, which is why the Great Migration happened, because the largest skill set of slaves was agriculture, so they were farmers. And so once that became obsolete, they had to leave, right? That was one issue. And the other issue was what Dr. Dunn talked about, like the Red Summer of 1919, where over 3,500 black people were assassinated, killed, and targeted by white mobs that led to exodus of our people from the south to the west and to the east. And so when you look at things like sweet potato pie, right? Sweet potato pie in itself is a derivative of fusion. In the 16th century, the European powers came to Western Africa and started doing all their horrible things. In the process, they introduced pumpkin pie. And pumpkin pie became a huge favorite of Western African cuisine. As a result, when slaves were transported to the south, they did not have the yams that they used in Africa to make the sweet potato pie, and they used the sweet potato, which is a crop found in Mesoamerica. The potato originates in Mesoamerica, right? But most people think it's from Ireland, but that's a whole other story. And so the fact that you see this fusion, but then you see the sugar is now in the sweet potato pie and its preparation here in America, only because that was the introduction of European very, very horrible dietary conditions. And I think it's amazing that we switched this narrative as if our food was the one that was killing everyone, and it's the complete opposite, right? And so sugar and salt and fat and animal fat and butter are all European. It was not in the African diet because the pie was made with yams. The sugar content in yams is twice that of a sweet potato. So in order to make a pie, you had to add what? Sugar, right? And so that's how the slave owners started to demand slaves to make their cuisine, right? And so when you look at the initial introduction of soul food to this country, it looked more like a paleo diet, right? Leafy greens, mustard greens, cabbage, collard greens, string beans, okra, right? These are very, very healthy, extremely life-giving foods. Our proteins weren't fried chicken. We fried our chicken and we fried our pork and our pork, it was actually pork, and what we call peanut oil, right? Animal fat was not a cooking tradition of ancient Africa. Frying in itself originated in ancient Egypt. It spread to Western Africa, and those cooking traditions were used with vegetable oil and peanuts. As a result, you had a clean, non-cholesterol filled frying technique that then was taken to the United States, right? When you didn't have access to those things, the Scottish introduced frying with animal fat. So that's why Colonel Sanders' chicken looks the way it looks and tastes the way it tastes, because it's the first fusion of this country. So the culinary traditions, whether it's the legumes, which are butter beans and red beans and lima beans and pinto beans and all these amazing healthy benefits that you get from a soul food diet, we choose to represent the diet with things that were luxuries, like mac and cheese, right? The history of that, James Henry, Thomas Jefferson's chef, who created this dish as a result of the demands of the European palate. Most of the slave masters demanded that their cooks cook in a tradition that mirrored their culture, and that's how the food was created. Because now the master's saying, look, I need more sugar. Think about Queen Victoria. She went to India and ruined their cuisine. Milk is not a part of the Indian diet, but you have all these curries with cream in it because she was like, you need to add cream to this. And so now Indian food is horrible, causing all of these things, and the people that live here, and it's pitched as this horrible cuisine, but it's not. It's one of the healthiest cuisines on the planet. It originated in Indus Valley. It's the same thing that happened to African traditions. So when we talk about soul food, it's not killing us. The same thing that's killing us was the same thing that enslaved us. The influence of very negative, very insidious practices that continue, and then in the present day, we have this switch nation where we switch the narrative around and then demonize the people who are the originators of this very healthy cuisine, of this very life-giving cuisine, as seen in the longevity of Africans on the continent now. They're some of the longest living people on the planet. They have the most centennials outside of Asia. And so we have to be very careful at how we talk about people and and talk about ourselves, especially the way that we portray ourselves. So the narrative needs to be, get back to African American cuisine and not to a term that was created by the James Brown Black Power movement in the 1960s. That's how new the term soul food is. So it's really African American cuisine, just like jazz is African American classical music, it's not jazz, right? So we have to get and have the right conversation so that we can have a better outcome and leave you with the knowledge that I feel that you deserve.
I'd like to comment just briefly about life as a migrant child. Because when we went north, when school started in New York, regular school. So my brothers and I went to white schools on Long Island. We were the only black children in these schools. I just want to comment that as black children moved north, or moved to Atlanta, or to Miami, wherever, if they moved from the country, they were normally at a disadvantage in terms of the kids that they went to school with. We were behind, I was behind those white kids in my class in New York. And I still remember the feeling about that. Because in Florida, I was a top student. I was a great student. I go to New York and I was in the back, I was totally out of it. And the way that that made you feel, it was just terrible. I'll just mention one thing. I had a young teacher, a white teacher. And all the black kids in the school, except my brothers and I, she was trying to do the right thing. She wanted to include me in the class. I hadn't said anything, I was hiding in the back. And one day during music time, it's in the book, she says, Margaret, why don't you sing something for us? I said, well, I don't sing. She said, of course you do. How about Swing Low, Sweet Chariot? Right. So I just swing down further and I see. She moves on to someone else. But I just want to comment that for children who were on that migrant stream, whether they were on the back and forth agricultural one or going up to Maine in New York or Detroit or wherever, they paid a cost in those classrooms. For a whole generation, they probably paid a cost in trying to catch up.
Thank you. So as you can see, there's nothing at all simple about the food we eat, about the roads that we've traveled so many years, and the intersection of politics and history is complex and much of what we want to bring to you today. We're going to spend a lot more time delving into this conversation about food, but I'm going to back up just a little bit and talk a little bit about the history of the Great Migration. Jacqueline Woodson, who's been dubbed the Young People's Poet Laureate, was 5 years old when her mother first left Greenville, South Carolina for Brooklyn in 1968. Woodson's mother was one of 6 million African Americans who left the South in the mid-20th century to pursue greater opportunity up north. And she writes, and I'm going to read a little bit of it. I knew the story long before I knew. The reason for my mother leaving South Carolina, her black pumps, leather and new, bought a size too small, a sale, or vanity. She's gone now, so it's too late for asking. One shoe and then the other, and then the first again, and then small steps. Onto a bus, already filled with the leavers. People heading north from South Carolina, slipping like silk from their mouths. You got people up there, and where are y'all planning to stay up there? And the quiet yes-mans from the children. New York, a dream, in the palms of sweaty hands, the pinch of too tight shoes, a fierce wave of goodbye to old Jim Crow. I knew the story long before I knew the story. What were so many African Americans leaving behind and heading toward in the Great Migration? Dr. Dunn, can you start us off?
Yes, they were leaving behind the boll weevil. When that insect struck the cotton crops in the South, a lot of folks were wiped out, a lot of farms were wiped out. So that insect had a great impact on the available work for blacks in the South. They were leaving tractors. When the first white farmers started operating tractors, they didn't need as many black people working the fields. So there just was not that much more work to do. That's technology, pushed people on the road and north. Then there was lynching, violence. real fear that if you stepped out of line, you could end up dead. I think wanting to get away from the Klan, not knowing the Klan isn't a norm, wanting to get away from the Klan in the South anyway, wanting to have a sense of security that was not offered in the South was another reason that people went. And of course, work, jobs, the opportunity to start anew in a new environment and possibly raise your own family up another notch. But I think those are the things that push people on the road.
Thank you. The question is open.
I think looking at two halves of the Great Migration, so you had from 1916 to 1940, and then you have from 1940 to 1970. So each migration definitely had its different origins. So you're talking 1.5, and then like a lot more, 5 million, roughly 5 million the second time around. So the second migration definitely was rooted in economic opportunity, but the first one was heavily rooted in an escaping of a very dangerous South. Once sharecropping, it ended, it was just horrible for us. And you had all these Black Wall Streets that popped up. And so if you do your research, the Black Wall Streets were targeted during that time. And most of them, if not all of them, were in the South, and a couple were in the Midwest and the Northeast. And they were all destroyed. And so as a result, if you're living in a safe, bustling community, one of the worst riots was in Arkansas, actually, where 250 people lost their lives. And so when you look at that type of carnage, I mean, you're not gonna stay around. And it's important for us to focus on that because the narrative, again, changes. And so when you look at Jewish populations that escaped the horrible atrocities of Hitler, when you look at the Native Americans in the Trail of Tears, they paint this very, sentimental, very compassionate picture of these minority groups. But then when you talk about Black people, it's just like, those all these reasons they just all moved to these different cities because they built machines and then they left. And it's very important for us not to kind of like overlook that suffering, because that was the root of how our food became portable. The portability of our food was rooted in the suffering of our people and how we interpreted that once we landed in the destinations that we traveled to.
The Klan emerged or re-emerged in the 1920s during the First World War. It had been a violent group right after the Civil War that died down. The First World War starts and the Klan re-emerges. And so did the Second World War start. So I think one of the reasons what we're trying to get away from and get to, we're trying to get away from this re-emerging violence in the South. But there were also race riots in New York, in Chicago, in Detroit, Tulsa, Atlanta. A lot of these, Black folks didn't just meld into these new cities as they moved in. They were burned publicly, hung publicly, shot publicly, in northern cities as well. So what people thought they were going to was not necessarily the safety that they had hoped for. The other thing that they had not expected was that once Blacks moved north, all these Europeans would stop moving out. All these foreigners would start moving into the cities. And now it became competition for jobs, housing, and the birth of the ghettos we know today.
I would just have one quick point. I'm sure Dr. Dunn will probably talk a lot more about it. There was also other migrations that were involved, other Black populations, the West Indies, opportunities in Britain were drying up, and so they were going to the same places, in many cases, compete for the same jobs. And so I'm kind of a product of that convergence. My mother is from Savannah, Georgia, and my father is from Kingston, Jamaica, and so both tales of kind of was this meeting by chance by both families coming to New York looking for, in some ways, similar opportunities. But they came with different perspectives on Blackness and different perspectives on I guess what America represented, and I think that is a whole other element that I'm sure we can talk about.
I wish I had time to talk about that. Jamaican attitudes about race. That's another conference.
That's next year. And building on that conversation about the other migrations, and certainly Ms. Randolph touched on that in her opening statement. Here in Miami, where African Americans make up just around 22% of the population, and many of whom have deep roots and a great legacy here in Florida. So with that being said, what is the story of and the historical impact from the Southern migration? Who would like to tackle that one?
The impact of the Southern, you mean the reverse migration?
Yes.
Well, in the food world, we've been to about 185 restaurants in our 3 years, and the best example of African American cuisine is definitely up north, unfortunately. Like as far as restaurants are concerned, and I think that that's an interesting narrative, right? Because you would imagine it would be in the South, but your best quintessential Mississippi Delta, low country cooking is found in Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland. It's not found in Montgomery and Atlanta and Charleston. It's just not. And that's because of the Great Migration. And so now you're seeing this reverse. And so if you go to Savannah, at the Grave, you'll see a chef that is doing amazing things. And you talk about, the lineage of Nearest Green and what's happening with Jack Daniels and what they're doing with folks coming from New York. For those of you who don't know, Jack Daniels was invented by a black man. His name was Nearest Green, and he was a distiller. He was an enslaved distiller. And as a result, there's some really great things happening in food as a result of the reverse migration. So I guess in short, it's creating economic opportunity for black chefs in the South, a lot more than they are in New York. And I just wrote an article actually with Detroit Hour magazine called The Unhidden Food Scene. Because in Detroit, unfortunately, all black chefs are being pushed out. Like they're not getting any recognition. And so when we start writing about the invisibility of black chefs and black food and the appropriation of black food and black chefs, it's horrible up north. And so now when you come to the South, you have all these opportunities. You have the opportunities to get investments, you have the opportunity to grow your business because it's a lot cheaper here. But now, I will say, it's creating a problem because we're seeing signs now that blacks who are leaving and coming back here are having major issues with blacks who are already here who don't have the opportunities that they're now receiving. So it kind of rolls on what the whole Caribbean, Black American identity. So when it comes to food, that's created a big problem, right? Because Caribbean restaurants are clustered and Black American restaurants are isolated. You'll never see a clustering of black soul food spots, but you always see a clustering of Caribbean folks because their unity and the way they deal with each other is different. And so I just experienced something that was horrible, but it's the reality that we face. If I'm a black chef and I'm reverse migration, I come from New York and now I open a spot that is across the street from a native, Black Miamian, that Black Miamian is going to go crazy. And it's sad because of the way that Miamians, Black Miamians, are unfortunately treated. There's this huge amount of defense. So you now don't see, like in the Cuban or Caribbean population, where literally 4 Jamaican restaurants are in the same plaza, operating happy and no problem. You will never see that with African Americans. You will never see 4 soul food spots right next to each other. And because of that, that's the ramifications of this reverse migration, because now it's this fighting of territory, it's this fighting of being seen. And that's something that Black Americans have always struggled with, is visibility, right? Because you can feel the culture, you can see the culture, but you're not seeing the creator of that. So you'll dance the dance, you'll eat the food, you'll hear the music, but you don't see the individual. So it's this constant fight of you need to see who I am. So I can't have you overshadow where I am because you're gonna open your business now and you're not gonna see my business, right? So rather than seeing it as a collaboration, it's instantaneously seen as competition.
Thank you. Ms. Randolph, may I put you on the spot to speak to that?
Sure. I unfortunately I disagree slightly because I honestly don't know of that many African American restaurants here in Miami. I can't relate to what he was just saying because my argument is always that we aren't represented here enough. I don't recall driving up the street, maybe in some neighborhoods, maybe in certain areas of Liberty City, but I can't recall seeing many authentic African American restaurants here. We have some Caribbean-owned restaurants that serve African American foods, but you know, I think that the problem is that we just simply aren't represented here enough, and when we are, it's not in great variety. You know, most people are serving and selling the same types of foods. And I think that also has a lot to do with us Black Miamians not really knowing much about our culture and where we came from. Maybe a family reunion is a time where, you know, most Black Americans in Miami would visit where our parents and our grandparents came from. But for the most part, we're here, we're uncultured, untaught, and you know, for the most part, most Black Americans in Miami are also ashamed. Ashamed of where we come from, ashamed of our history, ashamed of, you know, we really don't want to know or get in tune with the past and slavery and the fact that, you know, my grandfather or my great-grandfather was a slave. So, you know, most, in my experiences, most Black Miamians just kind of want to start over and blend in with, you know, the Miami culture, whatever that is. So, you know, that just, I can't speak to that because that just hasn't been my experience.
So I want to touch on a point with as far as like in the connection with that question, right? If you're asking about, you know, what effects has it had in the food world, right? That's the question. And unfortunately, the effect has been a sort of subduing of natives in the South, like Black culinary professionals in the South, right? So if you look at the soul food offerings here in Miami, you have Ernestine's, and you have Homestyle, you have Miami Soul Cafe, you have Arlene's, which is a bit pain, so I'll take them out. Purely soul food places, you have Homestyle, Miami Soul Cafe, Ernestine and Louise, MLK, Jackson's, a new place that just opened, Maddie's, Chef Lou's. So you have a sizable number, and they're isolated. They're not next to each other. They're far away from each other. And so when you look at Ms. Money?
How can you be next to each other when it's only a handful?
Still few.
I mean, if
The whole Miami.
I go to all Black restaurants, Caribbean, any of them. I go to all restaurants, including Caribbean restaurants. I know a lot of the different cooks and chefs. And you can't grow Miami that fast. The younger generation now is coming out and not ashamed to be a cook or a chef. But when I was growing up, they looked down on cooks and chefs. They really did. And if your child come to you and say, I want to be a chef, no, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a lawyer, you're going to work in a hospital as a nurse. But being a chef was not an option. I raised my grandchildren differently because I was telling them a chef makes more money than a doctor or a lawyer. So then younger generation now got the opportunity in high school. They're teaching them to go in those culinary options now. You can go to high school and learn to be a chef now. It used to be you go to high school, you learn to be a nurse or a doctor, lawyer, anything but a chef. So I've seen the field of restaurants growing in the black community. For there was one period of time you saw every other nationality in the restaurant business but black American. You may see one or two here or there, but you can't be that close knit if it's so few of you.
I think the issue is the fact that it's not an issue of scarcity of people and entrepreneurs. It's really a cultural issue. The restaurants that we just named, they're purposely not next to each other. And I know this for a fact as a food writer. When I write about these restaurants, I hear their stories. It's heartbreaking at times when I hear the things that certain entrepreneurs would do to prevent other entrepreneurs from getting ahead, right? And that view of competition, if you look at the offerings of, let's just take the Cuban culture for instance, right? And even the Cuban culture has its own sort of migratory experience as well, right? When you look at Finca, that's like Cuban fusion, it's Cuban and Asian, right? So like, how does that jive with someone that loves the Canary Islands? I'm sorry, Spanish is bad, Islandia, Canary, but anyway. So if you're going from there, and then you go to Havana Harry's, and then you go to La Coretta, and then you go, so all of these places, right? So as a food writer, I'm gonna eat everywhere. I'm not just eating African-American cuisine, right? So I can write about the flavors because Cuban cuisine has a lot of African food pathways, right? However, they're clustered. When you go to a Colombian eatery, right? They're clustered, they're right next to each other. You are a Haitian eatery, they're right next to each other. And so soul food is very isolated, it's very protected, and the reason it is protected, it's not a bad thing, right? So I'm not saying this is a bad thing, it's just our cultural, it's what happened to our people. So when we have these conversations, we have to look at it from an academic standpoint. Black American farms, right? Black American slaves are isolated. So the English slave masters here specifically prohibited the use of the drum, specifically prohibited African rituals. And the only preservation of the small snippet of that culture is in the Gullah Geechee people. They were the only, and they were on an island. That's why. So that's why you can go to the Gullah Geechee people, and they're very communal. So it's very identical to Caribbean populations, because their experiences are different. As African Americans, literally, and Dr. Duncan talked about this for days, once you blended, you had 7 kids or however you split up. You're isolated, you're by yourself. So you learn this survival, you learn this protectionism, and so that's why soul food places aren't ubiquitous. Like, think about that. There's no fast food equivalency to soul food. So our food can be appropriated, but it can't be replicated. It's very specific and identical. The flavors are so complicated. So it's sophistication and simplicity. And so you're looking at, and the reason why Ms. Juanita can speak intelligently on cuisine is because she's my reference point. Everywhere I've eaten, she is my reference point because her ability, she almost reminds me of what's her name? Edna Lewis. Edna Lewis, if you don't know, is the matriarch of soul food, right? Like, she's a matriarch, so look her up. Ms. Juanita's like South Florida's Edna Lewis. So when you eat collard greens, that's my reference point. So if you love her vegan greens, imagine how her pork greens taste. Imagine how her turkey greens taste. And so when you look at the flavors of African American food, I want you to try right now to compare it to anything, and you can't. You literally cannot compare African American food to anything. So because of its culinary reception, of course it's going to be isolated. How can you now create a clustering of African American food if you're only cooking low country food, which is what Anisha pointed out? Because African American cuisine is not just soul food. You have low country, you have Midwestern, you have the island, the Gullah Geechee food, you have Midwestern food. So if you're talking about dishes like Hoppin' Johns, right, which they make is incredible. It's originally made with a red pea, but in the red pea family is a black eye, right, which is a crop of West Africa. If you're talking about okra soup and gumbo, okra soup is the precursor of gumbo, and the precursor of okra soup is a Senegalese stew, right? And so when you start looking at these these heritage brands and sort of how fried chicken even came about, like looking at the migratory sort of culinary spirit, right? fried chicken came to this nation from a woman, from an enslaved cook who literally walked around Philadelphia. Philadelphia was the epicenter of Black culinary sophistication. So when you talk about how our food became portable, it's really through Philadelphia and the industrialization of, you know, chickens and like, there's a whole history behind that, but I'm gonna kind of cover it. Yeah, sorry. Sorry.
It's all right, I understand. It's a very slippery slope when you start talking about African American and Caribbean differences. I'm going to resist doing that because I heard somebody's feelings. Except to say my father was an African American born in Florida. Typical as you would expect. My dad was a black archbishop. Anybody wasn't black. And then a lot of black folks didn't like it, including Bahamians and Jamaicans. They took my dad talking about Jamaicans and what the Bahamians what they ate. They ate too much fish. Men got small butts, women talk too much. So we have some issues to work out. You married a Jamaican woman, she never shut up. She was a black archibald, like I tell you. My point is, though, with Africa, I'm not ashamed. I go back to your comment. I'm very proud of my status as an African American. But there were issues that impacted African American life that were not understood by the Caribbean Black community of this country. So there were clashes and what have you. But I do just want to say that in terms of my own experience, I was never ashamed of being an African American person. I never cared that. I was forced just a week ago when I gave a talk, Black History talk, with some little kids, just baby kids, first through fifth graders. And they asked me, one boy asked me, when did white people first started not liking black people? And I had a better question asked to me by a group of PhDs. But it made me think back on my own experience. When did I first feel, I was never ashamed, but when did I first sense there was something wrong in American, in Southern society? When did I sense there was something wrong? It wasn't quite as it should be. And that was a day, Wisha County, when I was in line with my mom at the post office. She was in line to buy stamps. She knew other black people. And this white lady came in and got in front of her. I was 7 years old. And my little 7-year-old listening told me, that's not right. That's not fair. And then more people, white people did that. From that time on, I became sensitive to the fact that things weren't fair and white people had advantages that we didn't have. And that translates at all levels of your experiences you're coming up. But never for me to the point of being ashamed of being an African American. And then in competition with perceptions of Jamaicans and Bahamians and other blacks moving to the country, particularly compared to Black Americans, it's a little touchy because our experiences culturally have been so different.
Thank you, Chris. I think you have a question.
Yeah. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for lunch. As you can see, I love food. I'm from New Jersey, and my family migrated from Virginia and North Carolina and went to Harlem and then to Newark, New Jersey. You know, one of the things that this conversation reminds me of is that, you know, growing up in New Jersey, I grew up on, you know, going out on diners, sort of like a diner culture. Here in Miami, I don't see a lot of soul food restaurants. What I do see is, because it's Miami and it's a fusion of a lot of different people, what I do see, and I go to a lot of restaurants, again, as you can see, anytime I'm in a restaurant and I taste something, I always, back in my mind, I always say, there's a black person in the back. And I ask, and lo and behold, many times, it's a black person in the back making that food. I can taste it, you know? And then there's sometimes I go to very expensive restaurants, and I look at the menu, and I'm still like, there's somebody back there making that food. You know, you don't go to Prom 112 and they got collard greens on the menu. That doesn't happen, but it does happen. It's there. Sushi Samba has collard green sushi, you know? So I always see that, and it's the truth. I think that our food has permeated American culture. Elizabeth Catlett had a saying, you know, she came here to Miami as a visual artist. By the way, I have an art exhibition at downtown Overtown. You should come check it out, Elizabeth Catlett. She made a statement one time in which she said that why is it that our black music is so respected, is so well known, and and progressed so much over years and is known as black music, but visual art is not. And the reason being is that, slaves, when they were working, they were able to make music while they were working, which you could never do. And you could do that, do visual art while you were a slave, because everything was owned by the master. Everything you made was owned by them. So in the food, I see the same thing. Black folk have been making America's cuisine for many, many, many years. And it's embedded in so much of what is called American culture. It's embedded in it. And I just wanted to make that statement. One thing that I wanted to talk about specifically regarding food in Africa is the bean, the coffee bean. Most people don't know the coffee bean comes from Africa. So people in Miami are every day drinking coffee, in all different types of coffee, whether it's Cuban coffee, Colombian coffee, whatever it is. They are drinking something that's born and birthed in Africa. I would love for somebody to speak just about the coffee bean and its migration to America.
Well, I'll leave the coffee bean up to someone else, but I did want to touch something else that you mentioned. Dr. Dunn, you know how you got something in your head and just anxious to get it out. So I agree with you that American cuisine pretty much, you can wrap it up to African American cuisine because we're the creators, of so much that we know today as American foods. And regarding the shame, what I found is that people like my grandmother and Dr. Dunn, people who are in touch and in tune with their history, those are the folk that kind of, aren't ashamed, and I'm sure their children and their grandchildren, aren't ashamed of our past and our history because we're aware. And, so you'll find that, most of the time it is the younger generations who, have gotten out of touch and out of tune, and maybe their parents and their grandparents didn't tell the stories about where we've come, how we've overcome. Those are the ones who are, who've been kind of ashamed. But, I was just raised to know that our foods, they were originally organic, local, sustainable, fresh, rich in vitamins and nutrients. Even the pot liquor from collard greens are high in and rich in vitamin K. So I've never been ashamed of our food. I've never been ashamed of where we've come from. And also regarding Southern food or soul food or African American cuisine being unhealthy, that's something I agree with starts. It's just not true when created in its original form. Our ancestors, the way that they created it, it was free of additives and, being processed. The fast food is what's, pretty much killing the communities these days. That's what's doing it. And the things that are added to food, the preservatives, even the way that we seasoned our foods in the past with, natural ingredients. When you pick up a bottle of Lawry's seasoning salt or complete seasoning, more than likely those ingredients contain MSG. So that's where, our foods are kind of, now you can say, oh, it's giving you high blood pressure and hypertension and those things. It's the way that we're cooking things today that's a problem. But in its original form, our ancestors were artists. For you to take chitlins, pig intestines, and create something that, number one, is edible, and just create something that is so good, and you have to be an artist in order to do that. Our people were able to take scraps or anything and just and make it taste good. But these days you'll find young people praising for gras. And what is that? That's the fatty liver of a duck. So they're celebrating those foods and they're proud of those foods. Even caviar. I think caviar is number 3 on the list of the foods with of the 3 worst. Yeah, one of the 3 worst and most toxic foods. So, but we praise those foods, or not me, but some of the younger generation, they praise those foods. So I think that you know, with learning our history, with learning food culture, and the original way that our ancestors created, it gives you a different sense of pride. And you know, that's what I was talking about, Dr. Dunn.
All right.
Not that your generation is shame.
Long that is nice, thank you.
I just wanna, so I wanna also make a distinction though between what we were and what we are, right? And so, you know, I preface my points about talking about the households that I go into today, right? We go into today. The households we go into today eat foods high in fat with a lot of salt. And while I definitely don't disagree that, and never would say that we should disavow soul food, I have no interest in that in any way, shape, or form, or any other cultural food. I'm simply saying that it is just one element, and that there are systems that have been built around that one element, inclusive of the propaganda, right, around it, that reinforce some of the outcomes that we see that we don't want to see, right? And so I can make the case, you know, especially, so we know for a fact, right, that only about 5% of the health outcomes that emerge in all people are attributable to actually receiving medical care. The other 95% is attributed to the social and genetic makeup of individuals, right? And so that should be telling to us. But it translates to something much larger, and I think a lot more specific to African Americans. We continue to see disparities in health outcomes, even as we gain prosperity, right? So it's not like only the poor of our community remain sick. It still transcends even though we gain prosperity. So even though we have home ownership, even if we have greater education, we still see these outcomes. And so how do we get ourselves to a point where we can translate prosperity of one element of our existence to multiple areas of our existence, inclusive of food? And so I think what Sarah said is brilliant around the fact that maybe bringing people back to the origins of what food really meant to us. But going a step further, being more invested in the sourcing of the food that we prepare, right? We don't have to stop at just being the one who prepares the food or the one who owns the restaurant. We can maybe own the sourcing of the food and connect them, right? And so that's the thing that, you know, I think, so when we talk about, once again, my field of health, it's about the complete system that creates unhealthiness. It's not one component, it's a complete system. And so I'm just as invested in seeing African Americans employed as I am them eating healthy food, right? Because I know one comes with another. And so I think in food, we need to think the same way, right? You want to locate your restaurant around individuals who are gainfully employed and owning their homes, right? So right, we all gain from that. So maybe, you know, connecting all of the different players involved with this and not only seeing one sector as part of the industry may be an approach that we can go to.
Thank you very much. We have a question on the floor, and this gentleman's been waiting so patiently, and then we'll go back to the question, Chris's question about coffee. Sir.
It's a statement that goes into it's a question. So my people are from the Caribbean. I'm Boricua, which most people call Puerto Rico. It's the indigenous name of the island. So I'm Afro-Boricua, and I see what they've done. I'm gonna tie the two together. So I've seen what they've done in the Caribbean. My country used to grow everything that it needed to sustain itself, and then you see U.S. colonialism come in and disrupt that. And so I'm making that connection. The Hungry Black Man, you had talked about Black Wall Street, and I think immediately about Tulsa, Oklahoma, where the U.S. military was dispatched for an act of terrorism within our country. So the U.S. military sent out airplanes, and they literally bombed Tulsa, Oklahoma, which was considered Black Wall Street. It was one of the most successful Black cities in the U.S. And so in relation to the Great Migration, I think oftentimes something that's overlooked is that whenever we do something successful and whenever we do come together, that it gets attacked. And so can you all kind of address that?
Well, I wouldn't say whenever.
When?
Because it makes it sound as if every time blacks have gotten ahead, they've been attacked. That would be an overstatement. But it's happened enough times to raise the question as whether or not we've gone through periods when there was white opposition to black economic advancement. And that's true certainly over the years in certain pockets and under certain circumstances. I don't know, you're correct in your assessment about what happened in Tulsa. To some degree, the same thing happened in Rosewood, Florida, and that, was burned down. I just wouldn't want to overstate that part, but I do understand what you're trying to communicate.
So, the coffee bean response, but that's, it's interesting, seriously, because that's what the panel is about, the migratory, effects of food. And that's probably the greatest example of African portability. The coffee bean originated in Ethiopia. I know people from Yemen get upset because they're like arguing, like the coffee bean originated in Ethiopia, but like who grew the coffee first? And so Ethiopia won that argument through historical data, right? So it definitely, and we're talking inner Ethiopia, we're not talking like on the coast. So anyway, the coffee bean, you're talking 850 AD, the first like coffee, like people drinking coffee in Africa. And it didn't reach Europe until the 16th century. And when it reached Europe, it's actually really funny, it reached Italy, and the Vatican condemned it. They said it was of the devil. And so it was bitter, and they spit it out, and it's so funny, right? Like, Italians, it was like, this is from the devil. And Arab traders, through the slave trade, it reached the Spanish country, and as a result, the Spaniards loved it. And of course, they spread into the New World, their New World, the whole world anyway, spread into the world we live in now, this side of the hemisphere, and it permeated, right? It became a crop that was very profitable. So how coffee is, and if you want to get a great example of a great fusion dish over at Zest Mining, which is a black-owned restaurant, and there's a black-owned restaurant right here in Coral Gables, by the way, Orchard Meat on the Mouth. So if you've ever been there, that is a black-owned space. Delia Shirley is his name, great guy. So the coffee, there's a dish at Zest Miami if you're interested, and they took coffee and they grounded it and they created a seared salmon with it. It's really delicious. And then if you want to get an example of coffee in its pure sense, go to Awash Ethiopian in Miami Gardens, which is the only Ethiopian restaurant in Dade County, and Broward County for that matter, and you can have go through the coffee ceremony. There's a ceremony that Ethiopians go through that welcomes you in their home. The moment you walk into an Ethiopian's home, you're greeted with coffee. There's a coffee ceremony. They have all the authentic ceremonial furniture. It's a beautiful space. So if you're really interested in how coffee has really made its way into our culture, definitely check out Awash Ethiopian right here in your backyard. Go through the coffee ceremony. It's incredible. Yeah. I don't know why I know that. I'm glad that you know. I'm glad that you know all of this stuff when you're writing and like traveling, So definitely check them out.
Are there any other questions or comments for our panelists? We're going to be going into closing statements, but the floor is open if you have any questions.
I have a comment.
Yes.
I just want to say that I really appreciate, you guys coming here today, and I learned so much, and it really
opened my mind to how cultural Miami really is, and how we can be influenced by African Americans, and how, because I'm Cuban, and Cubans have African roots in them too. So I just feel like, everything that you talked about, I had ideas about, but not really to the extent of what you spoke about. I consider myself to be a very cultural person. I love to hear about other people's stories and other people's backgrounds, because I feel that as a human, the more awareness that we have, the better humans we could be. So it's just great to have these conversations
because I feel like it makes me a better human, and I feel like when we hear about other people's stories and struggles, it helps us prosper in the future. So that's my 2 cents.
Well said, Amy. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
I've learned so much. Thank you so very much today, because I've always thought black folks thought food was equity, because it's an intersection into everything that brings about, especially for me, joy. As a child, Sundays was the best day for me, because that's the way we fellowship and that's where we were entertained and all those connections were made. And then as I grew, I always just thought it was my job to be the best cook. And I think a lot of chefs are in the kitchen at home right now. I've never really knew so much, and even if, as you describe our culture, so being brought up over town and having Jacob Coyne as my history teacher, understanding the African Moors and how we, the first bones, I've always been very proud of who I am and love that we have the ability to transcend into every form, to make everything very comfortable. So learning today was very important to me about the, I didn't know why I was crushing up coffee and putting it in my food, but I do a little bit of everything. And for me, the greatest joy about what we do, my grandmother always used to say, you know, it's a little bit of everything, and we can always make it very complicated. So when you talked about the seasoning of our food, I was like, I only do salt, a very little salt, black pepper, and garlic, and then I blend and rub. And that's the way I was taught, never to be over the top, just very simple. And I get a lot of compliments, and people say I'm a darn good cook.
You mentioned that some of the chefs are being driven out of Chicago, the Chicago area. Why is that?
Gentrification. Yeah, it's like, it's really bad actually. You have several different counties surrounding Detroit proper, and Danny Golder's done a great job with the redevelopment there, but causality, unexpected result of that is Detroit's become part of like this. There is a white migration right now. It became part of the white migration. And so white millennials are migrating like crazy to the South as well. That's not just a black thing, right? And they're migrating from very urbanized, in suburban neighborhoods like New York, and they're coming to Detroit for opportunities. So Detroit is packed with white culinary professionals. The population of Detroit is around, a little over 1 million, and Detroit proper has 758,000 black people. And, the white population was around 80,000, now it's like 150,000. And so you're seeing this huge amount of white infusion. And so they want to eat from themselves, but prepared by black cooks. And that's what the gentleman back there was talking. That's the biggest issue. The biggest issue, and before Anthony Bourdain died, he said that. They asked him, in Miami, nonetheless, what is the biggest challenge in the culinary industry? And without, a millisecond, he goes racism. And so for a guy that high on the totem, to realize this problem and how big it is, Detroit is failing miserably at keeping its black chefs. Chef Max Hardy is a great chef that I know, and he has 3 eateries that he opened. One of them he has to close. One of them he had to restrict the hours simply because the city is becoming more centralized. So all the energy that was spread into the community is now in Detroit downtown. And they've made it a very safe white space, unfortunately. And it's the same thing with like Marcus Samuelson. You have these, that's the wrong word, so I'm not gonna use that word, but it's people that the white culinary machine says, you're our golden child. And we will take you around and say, we're not racist, look at him, and that's it. Because you can't name any other black culinary professional besides Marcus Samuelson that's doing what he's doing. But you can name 9 whites, you can name 10, and even more importantly,
Detroit is suffering from what Miami suffers from. Like, just think about this for a second. I refuse to go to the Southeast Food and Wine Festival until their racist practices stops. Because you're in Miami and you don't even respect the Cuban culinary heritage when you come here. You don't invite some amazing Cuban chefs to even demo their abilities at the South Beach Food and Wine. It's overwhelmingly prepared for Northern whites. It's not for Caribbean folks, and it's definitely not for Black people. And so Detroit is unfortunately mirroring that type of environment, and because that happens, Blacks, we already can't get loans like that, so now you're definitely not gonna get a loan to open a business, because it forms like a racist kingdom almost, right? So like Wynwood's one of those spaces here. Wynwood's one of those spaces. You can open up, if you're Black, you can open in Coral Gables, it's a very rich, predominantly white neighborhood. You can open in Miami Beach, right? But you cannot do that in certain, like Wynwood and the Design District. And so Detroit's becoming very urbanized, and it's pushing Black people out the way that Miami-Dade County, unfortunately, and they're doing this, I don't know if they're doing it knowingly, but Black people now, right? So they built a highway, destroyed our communities, and we were dispersed into suburban neighborhoods, right? Very bad side neighborhoods where there's not a lot of traffic. And then, now the oceans come in and take all the stuff that you like because the Bahamians were there first, and that's important to know, right? The Bahamians were on the coast first. And then they were tripped, and then they were like, whatever, right? So all this, everything just repeats itself. And so now it's happening in food big time. So as a Cuban chef, think about this, right? Cubans and Cuban cuisine, Black culinary heritage, and all of these things together, right, creates Miami. But if you take away Cuban culture and Black culture, it's very hard to have Miami, to be Miami. It's almost impossible. So the glitz and the glamour and the hip hop community is what makes us sexy, right? We want to come here because of Uncle Luke. If you take away Uncle Luke, if you take away the Cuban innovation, right? Take away all of it, like take away the Black culture, what are you left with? Like seriously think about that. And so Detroit is the same way. If you take away Motown, what are you left with? You have to recreate something. So Detroit is literally, guys, I'm telling you, it's recreating itself. I'm sorry.
I think everyone's aware of gentrification, but not as it applies to food, and I think you highlighted something that's very important that most people are probably not aware of. So thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move into, okay, Jeff, one more question?
No, it was really more of a comment, is that I appreciate what I've seen here. I'm in my 60s and I was born in Detroit, so what you're saying about Detroit, I understand, and I'm still understanding my African heritage and exactly where actually, I'm working on finding out exactly the Carolinas, exactly where everybody came from. But the point I want to make is, what you're doing, this kind of, is something that should be taught in all the schools, but especially predominantly African American schools, because my issue is that growing up in Detroit, I didn't know any of this stuff. It wasn't until I became an adult and I could research on my own to find out who I am and what I am. And I think that if that were done on a more regular basis, forgetting about the fact that we're never going to see that in the history books, explaining the African experience, which was an experiment, and still is from the 1600s. Slavery, it was said in the 1600s of dividing us, and it's still alive and well right now. And that hasn't stopped. So we can do that. And what I'd like to see is if there won't be in history books, that kids in Miami and all over the US can understand about all the cultures, but especially the African American experience and other African American kids understanding how great they are and what they come from and the challenges that their ancestors. You know, my daughter tells me, she doesn't really get upset. I say, why? She says, Dad, because my ancestors came over here in a slave ship and had years of slavery. So I'm gonna complain because somebody cut me off? Or because I can restart doing something? I'm here because they survived that. And that's the thing that we need to make sure that the youth of today, all youth, but especially African American youth, understand so they can move forward in a positive direction.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome, first of all, thank all of you for coming today, but and specifically like to thank the Wells Foundation for their kind donation, all of the wonderful food we've been able to take part in today. Proudly represented by Michael Cullen here today. Welcome, Michael. We hope you enjoy today's ELCTalks, and we're very happy to have you here, and we truly appreciate you and your organization. Dr. Brewster, would you start us down the home stretch here?
So I think the only thing that I would probably add to what I think is just a great panel is the way forward. I think food is, like we all know, is a very, very powerful thing. I'm often asked, about, from my students, steps to change. And I always share with them, that they should set goals. You can go a full year and no one who doesn't look like you has ever sat at your dinner table. You have to begin to challenge, your convention. And food is a very powerful thing. I have a friend and colleague in the Netherlands, Ahmad Ruz, who does Ramadan dinners to bring about change in the perception of Muslims in Denmark, in the Netherlands. And it's all about food. It's all about sitting people down at a table, over food, and talking and learning about one another. And I think there's no better, more comfortable way to learn about a person and their culture and appreciate their richness than to welcome them into your home and sit them at your table. And imagine what that communicates to your children when you can sit and have other individuals who don't look like you in your home eat at your table, what that communicates to your children, both ways, right? I'm always blown away by the numbers of students and faculty members who, when I bring that up, can say, I've gone years without a person of color being in my home for dinner, or vice versa, right? And so it seems like a very small thing, but I like to lead people with action-oriented or solution-oriented things, and so that would be my my way forward.
Thank you, Anita.
Yes, and I'd also like to add to that. First of all, I'm grateful for you all even having me on this panel with such amazing speakers. And I'm grateful that I was able to add my story and my family's history to the conversation. And I'd like to challenge everyone to just make sure that we utilize food as a connector, but also if we could kind of make it our social responsibility to spread the word on some of the information that we receive today, whether it's to your children, your grandchildren, or even a younger African American child whose family may not have taught them this history, because the contributions by African Americans were definitely great, but they're often downplayed. So it's up to us to make sure that we make it our social responsibility to just honor those who have come before us and who've made such great contributions that we all still can enjoy today.
Thank you, Dr. Dunn.
Well, the migration of blacks to what's now Miami took place first from Bahamians in the early 1800s, moving up the chain of the Keys, eventually to Miami, to Coconut Grove. African Americans, when the city was founded in 1896, moving from Georgia, South Carolina, and North Florida, as my parents did, eventually migrating to Miami. And then later the arrival in the 1980s of the Haitians and Caribbean, other Caribbean blacks in large numbers. So those four streams constitute most of the population of black people who live in Dade County today. And even though we've touched on some of the conflicts in those cultures, I'll tell you this, my dad may not have liked Bahamians, but he loved counterfeiters. Black people, African Americans, complaining about the Cubans, again, taking our jobs, you got a mouthful of plantains. So food is a great leveler. If something tastes good, damn it, it just tastes good. It may not even be good for you, but you don't ask those cultural, racial questions when you want to eat something really good. So the way I think this panel helps to sift through some of that so we can understand some of the history of our tastes and our tendencies in food as we practice it today. So thank you for the chance to be here today. We appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Ms. Jarvis.
Thank you for the opportunity. I talked enough, so.
I want to thank all of you for joining us here today. We always end our ELCTalks by reminding you that after today you can choose to look away, but you cannot say that you did not know. Thank you for joining us. May I have